before the Vikings disappeared forever. This was the battle that broke them. In the year 1066, a clash of steel and ambition echoed across the fields of England. Two armies met in a battle so brutal, so decisive, it would forever mark the end of an era. This was a conflict that didn't just decide a kingdom, it ended the age of the Vikings forever. This is the true story of the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The final, glorious stand of the Norse warriors. In late September, a formidable fleet pierced the English coastline. The feared Norse king, Harald Hardrada, a name that struck terror across Europe, sailed to England with a massive force. More than 300 longships carried his army, a tide of elite warriors, battle-hardened berserkers, and champions of the unbreakable shield wall. Their sails filled the horizon, a promise of conquest. Hardrada wasn't alone. He was joined by Toasted Godwinson, the rebellious and exiled brother of the English king himself. Their shared ambition was simple but audacious, to seize the English throne and carve out a new kingdom. Landing in the north, their campaign began with ruthless efficiency. They marched through the countryside, leaving a trail of fire and fear. Villages burned, local levies were scattered, and soon, the great city of York fell into their hands. The north of England was theirs. The Vikings believed their victory was all but certain. But the English king, Harald Godwinson, was a man of fierce determination and unexpected speed. While the Vikings celebrated their initial success, believing Harald to be far south dealing with another threat, the English king did the unthinkable. He force-marched his army north, covering an astonishing 300 kilometers in just 4 grueling days. On the morning of September 25th, the Vikings were scattered along the banks of the River Derwent, completely relaxed. It was a warm day, and expecting no trouble, many had left their heavy chainmail armor back at their ships, miles away. They rested, confident and unprepared, armed with little more than their shields, swords, and axes. Then, in the distance, a glimmer of light caught their eyes, a reflection off steel helmets. A growing cloud of dust billowed on the horizon. The English army had arrived. The Vikings were caught completely and utterly off guard. Panic erupted as the blare of English war horns shattered the morning calm. As the English forces charged towards the narrow wooden crossing at Stamford Bridge, chaos reigned among the Norsemen. But in the midst of the confusion, one figure stood defiant. A single, colossal Viking berserker planted himself in the middle of the bridge, blocking the entire English army's advance. Wielding a massive Dane axe, he became an impassable wall of fury. He cut down every man who dared to challenge him, his roar echoing over the sounds of battle. Reports claimed he single-handedly killed 40 Englishmen. Spears were thrown, swords were swung, arrows were loosed. Nothing seemed to stop this lone warrior. He held the bridge, buying precious time for his comrades to form a line on the other side. But his legendary stand couldn't last forever. In a desperate and cunning move, an English soldier floated under the bridge in a small boat and thrust a long spear up through the wooden planks, mortally wounding the giant from below. At last, the hero of the bridge fell. The path was clear, and the full weight of the English army stormed across. On the far side of the river, the Viking shield wall had finally formed. It was a bristling rampart of round wooden shields, locked together, with a forest of spears and axes pointed outwards. It was tight, deadly, and had a reputation for being unbreakable. The English slammed into this wall of shields and iron with ferocious momentum. The sound was like thunder rolling across the valley. Shield against shield, axe against helmet. The brutal, close-quarters combat began. 4 hours. They fought under the searing sun. The ground grew slick with blood. Men fell from exhaustion as much as from wounds. The English threw wave after wave of soldiers at the Norse line, but the Vikings held firm. Their discipline unyielding, neither side would break. The battle hung in a bloody stalemate, but then the tide turned. English reinforcements, who had been marching hard to catch up, finally arrived. Fresh troops charged down the hill, crashing into the Viking flank. The shield wall, stretched thin and exhausted, began to falter. The Vikings were now surrounded, in the swirling chaos of the melee. King Harald Hardrada fought at the very front, a giant among warriors. He had cast off his own mail coat in a fit of battle fury, swinging his great two-handed sword, Emma, with terrifying force. He was the heart of the Viking resistance, his presence inspiring his men to fight on against impossible odds. He roared, cutting through English soldiers as he moved through the fray, a whirlwind of destruction. But in the heat of battle, fate strikes like lightning. An English arrow, loosed from the chaos, flew true. It struck the Viking king in the throat, piercing his windpipe. He stumbled, his great sword falling from his grasp. King Harald Hardrada, the thunderbolt of the north. The last great Viking king, fell to the ground, and as he died, the Viking spirit, which had burned so fiercely for so long, began to die with him. With their king dead, the offer of surrender was given to the remaining Norsemen. But Tostig Godwinson, the English rebel, refused to flee or beg for mercy. He chose to die beside the warriors he had brought to this foreign shore. Gathering the last remnants of the Viking army and his own housecarls, Tostig formed a final, desperate circle. Surrounded, outnumbered, and with no hope of victory, they prepared to make their last stand. They fought with the ferocity of cornered wolves, selling their lives as dearly as possible. They battled until the very last man was cut down. Not a single one of them surrendered. As the sun began to set, the final Viking warrior dropped to his knees, his shield shattered, his body broken. The battle was over. Of the 300 Viking ships that had sailed to England with such high hopes of conquest, only 24 were needed to carry the survivors home. The rest of the once mighty army was left on the blood-soaked fields of Stamford Bridge. The battlefield was a grim tableau of defeat, broken shields, abandoned weapons, and the silent bodies of thousands of warriors. Ravens circled overhead. The Battle of Stamford Bridge was a catastrophic defeat for the Norse. It shattered their military power and brought an abrupt and violent end to their era of raiding and conquest. This was their final roar, their final blaze of glory. This was the last great battle of the Vikings. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic stories.